I guess instead of just waiting around, I'll just jump into it because who knows how many people will show up for my first live. Um, so I decided today that since this is kind of a question and answers, that I'd like to revolve around chickens. To stay on that topic, I'm going to talk about kind of some chicken fighting, I guess, maybe. um, I'm going to be talking about kind of the myths and tips and tricks that you get when reading about how to raise chickens and how true those have been in just my experiences. So, one of the main thing, I guess we'll just start from kind of hatching. Everybody's going to start out raising chickens very differently, whether you're buying chickens or chicks, depending on their ages. If you're hatching them, the journey and learning curve is a little bit different. But we'll start with hatching. And one of kind of the tip, trick, kind of what I find to be more of a myth thing about hatching. When we're hatching chicks, we really want females. We want to be able to have and hatch chickens that are going to be able to lay eggs so we can get more chickens. So, one of the things that you kind of hear around the block, I guess, of the chicken tendering groups is that when it comes to hatching, if you hatch pointy eggs, those are roosters. If you hatch round eggs, those are hens. And I have hatched hundreds, if not like a couple thousand of chicks. And I have done that experiment many times. And it didn't matter if I had just pointy eggs, just round eggs. There was always a ratio of hens to roos. And each time was always a little different. Sometimes there were more roosters, sometimes there were more hens. But I have found that it is more from the way that things are incubated, of course, kind of the hen versus the rooster and them coming together, how many boys, how many girls, but also during the hatching process. Kind of accidentally, I discovered that when my temperatures were a little high, more hens hatched out, which means that I lost a couple more eggs in that process of it being too hot. And losing those eggs, I've kind of deduced that those were possibly roosters. So the eggs that don't survive the hatching process in a hotter temperature tend to be roos, so you end up with more hens. I'll take out my headphone. And then on the flip side, if you find that you're hatching on the cooler side of things, you'll lose more than likely. Those may most likely be hens, and then you get more roosters that hatch out. So roosters can handle the cooler temperatures during hatching and survive. Hens can handle the higher temperatures of hatching and survive. And that kind of is where I see a difference in the hen to roo ratio kind of consistently. Not that I'm purposefully trying to do that, but sometimes you just can't get an incubator temperature to that perfect spot and it's a little hotter, or on the flip side, it's a little colder. So the pointy egg to round egg, roo to hen is not, I don't want to say it's not true because maybe it is and I'm doing something weird, but that is debunked. I feel it's very debunked in my experiences. Um, hmm. Another thing, okay, so apple cider vinegar. When it comes to taking care of chickens, there's a lot of things that I see and read about giving your chickens apple cider vinegar. And not that it's bad, but it's definitely not good for them long term because their systems are different than humans or goats or what other kind of animals. All of our gut systems work just a little differently. And with chickens, it is kind of a bacterial balance. I mean, it's kind of the same in that way for everybody, but chickens are a little bit more susceptible to that balance being imbalanced. And apple cider vinegar, being the substance that it is, can throw off their kind of pH gut bacteria system. And usually it's only if it's a lot and kind of for a long time can it really cause that issue. But also if it's given to them long term over time and they're not given good breaks from it, like you could do like maybe a couple weeks and then a couple months off, a couple weeks, a couple months off. But if it's too close together and their systems aren't able to kind of process all of that, it actually can have an issue where they can't absorb calcium as well because we make we take eggshells and we dissolve it in apple cider vinegar so that that calcium gets bonded with those vinegar little bits. And it's really good to add into the garden, and the bacteria in the garden will break that down, and you have calcium for the garden. And that same kind of process happens in a chicken with the food they're eating. The calcium in there sometimes gets bonded to the vinegary substances, and it actually gets flushed out their system rather than absorbed into their system. So you can cause calcium issues by long-term giving apple cider vinegar to chickens. Not always, but it's something that I actually had happen, because in the beginning I did use apple cider vinegar pretty often, was having weak shell problems, and when I kind of read and discovered that aspect about apple cider vinegar, I stopped giving them apple cider vinegar, and their shells, it took a couple weeks, but hardened up pretty quickly. So be careful with using apple cider vinegar, especially to try to treat things. It's kind of a delicate thing. You usually want something a little bit more pharmaceutical versus natural if the issue is already present. But those natural ways of helping and kind of boosting immune systems when it comes to chickens, like, I think both is best, especially if you're already dealing with the issue. So like for sour crop, a lot of things that I've read will say use apple cider vinegar. I don't think that's a good way to do it, because their gut systems and bacteria are so different than ours. It might be really good for our gut bacteria, but it isn't quite the same for chickens. A little bit can be okay, but you're going to want to get a more specific medicine to deal with sour crop than just relying on the apple cider vinegar. Same thing when you hear about pumpkins and pumpkin seeds are good for deworming. It's actually not good for deworming. It's good as a preventative measure, because if you've ever chewed up a pumpkin seed with the shell on, it creates a fibrous mass. And so for a chicken, with the way their gut systems work, their gizzard is going to crush that seed up into that same fibrous fluff, and it's going to kind of scrub through their system. So it's more good at like cleansing the system, helping prevent parasites, than it will be if they have worms and you're trying to fix the worms with pumpkin. It would take tons of pumpkin, where it's probably not good for them to have that much pumpkin. Um, there's something else I was going to say about the pumpkin seeds. They can help, but don't rely. It's kind of one of those things about, like, if you're a natural, where you try to heal with all natural things. Like, I'm totally down and I love that aspect and it can work, but sometimes things are a little too serious, and like garlic can be really helpful in a lot of sick like situations, but if like an infection has gone too far, garlic is not going to be any help. You need some antibiotics. So it's kind of the same with chickens. You can do all the natural stuff to help prevent and just help keep them healthy, because keeping them healthy is the best preventative for everything. Natural stuff can help, but can be pretty tricky, and you have to be really rigorous about the treatment. But natural ways, got to be careful with them. I guess that's kind of the point about it, is they work, but not the way many people think they do or can. Sometimes they can, but like I said, you have to be really rigorous, really persistent, and it can take longer for the bird to heal and feel better from whatever they're healing from using natural things versus something more pharmaceutically. And I was gonna go hang out with the chickens for this live, but I figured that might be a little too chaotic. So you'll have at least chicken noises in the background, and I guess some little scuffles. Maybe I'll grab a chicken since nobody's watching yet. I'm gonna go grab a chicken. See how long he wants to hang out with me. I guess this could send me into another kind of hen or roo myth or tip or trick when it comes to sexing your birds. It can be really hard to know if it's a hen or a rooster for like a million different reasons. part of the reason for me is that I've bred my birds and they're mutts, and so sometimes I have hens with very roostery like features, and then sometimes I have roosters that look like hens until you hear them crow. So one of my rule of thumb when it comes to is it a hen or a rooster is you wait till it crows. But also, there's some things that you can see as they grow up, and even from when they're hatched. Like there's the wing trick, where if you spread out their wings when they're like up to 3 days old, there's there's a definition in their wings, and depending on that definition, it may be a hen or a rooster. Hens, if I remember it right, hens, the longer the end feathers will be a little bit longer, and so like their wing will come across and kind of bow out with some like longer feathers, versus a male, their little wing feathers will be pretty smooth and not no longer ones on the end. But I have seen hens with both and I've seen roosters with both. So I definitely like I put that in mind. I make a little note of it and kind of see sometimes roosters tend to have more of the all flush feathers. Sometimes the hens seem to have more flush feathers. So it's kind of a slippery slope when it comes to sexing chicks. You can do vent sexing, but I'm not very good at it for the like most part. I definitely when I hatch chicks, I'm giving some to someone. I do my best to sex them. Like I'll take all the different ways and combine them. And if this chick has more signs of being a hen, I'll say it's a hen, but there's like no promises, and that's kind of how it is for me. Like this one, everything about this little baby tells me it's a rooster, but it could surprise me later down the road and be a hen. Well, I won't be surprised at this point. But for one, just like some examples is as they grow, roosters' little butt tail feathers tend to take a while to come in, versus there's a hen that's the same age and size, and she actually has some pretty like tail feathers. So this kind of tells me, or that's one way it kind of tells me, okay, I'm leaning towards rooster. But as well as this baby's comb has been pretty pink for most of its life, and so the sooner they are red, like because they start out a pretty pale peachy color, it does depend on the breed, but the sooner it gets red the more likely it is to be a rooster. But like I said, I've had hens with super red roosters, super red combs right off the bat, and then I've had little roosters that their comb didn't turn red until they were older. So it's learning all the tips and tricks to sex a bird. Don't rely on one because they never tend to be super accurate. You may get a better ratio, but it's tricky business unless you're just like some people are just super ninja at it. They can just look at them and know. I'm almost there. Some pretty blue jays. We've been getting lots of blue jays since the rain. Don't want to move my phone though cuz I actually have good service. Um what other tips and tricks are there? Oh, I guess so. The same thing with hen versus rooster. You can tell if it's a hen or a roo by if they have spurs. And spurs, if you don't know, can I see your footsie? Well, let me see your footsie. There's usually, all right. Well, let me see his footsie. But if you don't know, a spur on the inside, kind of back of their leg, will be just like a hard fingernail, thorn-like thing, and roosters tend to have them while hens don't, but I have hens that have them and I have roosters that don't have them. So spurs definitely won't tell you if hen or roo, but more than likely roosters get big ones. Hens, there's usually stay pretty small if they do have them. There's also, so checking my notes, but so for hatching, there's also another way people try to sex them, is that when they hatch, they'll either hang them upside down by their feet, or they'll pinch the back of their necks and pick them up kind of like you do a cat. If the legs are relaxed, it's a hen. If the legs are up and pulled tight, it's a roo. It's definitely not one to go by because it's just not the nicest way to do things. But I have tested it as gently as I could, and it's just not an accurate way to do things. Because if you were dangling by your neck, who knows what you'd do? You either flail your legs or you just dangle there. So that's not a good way to do it either. But it's kind of the same with the hanging them by their feet method. If they relax, it's a hen. If it's a roux, they'll kind of tighten up towards their feet. And I've done that one as well, and it is also not accurate. If you were hanging upside down, you'd freak out a little bit too. But in a way, I don't condone, if that's the right word, to hanging your birds upside down. I actually work with my birds through their whole upcomings and raising them so that so for us, we do raise chickens so we can harvest them. They are either eaten by us or our cats and dogs. And that's what I do with all the roosters that I hatch out, is they do eventually become dinner, because in a sense you don't want to eat your hens because they lay the eggs and you can hatch those eggs for more chickens and round it goes. But sometimes I do still will harvest a hen. Older hens make really good nutrient dense broth. So that's one reason that like I don't like it's kind of a slow eating of the chickens. We don't harvest them all at once. It's just as needed. But it also makes it so I have older birds. They also make really good broody mamas when they're older, but also nutrient dense broth. The older the bird, the more nutrient dense they are, but also the tougher the meat, so it makes for good soup. Very good soup material. You cleaning? Cleaning your feathers? All those new feathers coming in? Um, but I do, let's to backtrack, I do hang my birds upside down very gently through the whole time I kind of interact and work with them, because it makes it easier. If I need to take someone off the roost to like for health checks, I go in at night, I grab them by the legs, and just it's as gently as I can. It's a flip upside down, and it's the easiest way to check over their whole body, not their mouth in the sense, but it's easier to peel back feathers in this direction, to look under all their feathers, to look under their wings, as well as to look at their vents. So to me, it's more of a conditioning them to be kind of okay with dealing with being upside down, but also because when harvesting time comes, the last thing I want to do is hang a bird upside down who's never been hung upside down before for the harvesting process and have that freak them out. So getting the birds used to that, it's not like I do it all the time. If you do it every once in a while to, each bird every once in a while, they get pretty used to it pretty quick. You just got to be gentle about it, kind of calming about it. It's definitely, you just got to work with them a little bit, and they get pretty used to it. And it's like I said, it's just helpful when it comes to health checks and looking at them. But when time comes to harvest them, most people do it by hanging them upside down. They kind of relax, some of them fall asleep, and then the harvest portion can happen. And I just find it easier if they're used to that. When the end comes, it just makes it more comfortable for everybody and just easier, because you don't want to be traumatized, and you don't want to traumatize your food in kind of that sense. And it's just nice because when they're all chill and just like to hang out with you, when the time comes for harvest, it's not a bunch of scared birds who've never been held before. It just makes it lots easier by a lot. But hanging them upside down is good for that reason, but not to tell if it's a hen or a rooster. So another kind of myth, tip, trick kind of thing is a lot of people will say to feed your chickens scrambled eggs or even raw eggs. It's a good protein boost. You're essentially just giving them the nutrients they used to make the egg. You're just giving it back to them. A lot of people really worry or say that it causes chickens to eat their eggs. And I have found that the only chickens who eat their own eggs are the ones who break the egg in the nest and they turn around and they eat it, because they want to keep the nests clean. Even if they're not brooding in them, if a chicken sees a broken egg, they're going to clean that mess up. Because even a broody mom, if she breaks an egg in a nest, she's going to eat it to keep the nest clean. And some chickens, when that happens and they clean up a broken egg in the nest, sometimes for them it registers like, oh, these things in the nest are delicious. Because chickens, they taste protein more than anything versus like, they taste sugary or salty or spicy. And I definitely know they don't taste spicy because I fed them some spicy peppers and they just loved it. And I'd be crying to death and they paid no mind. But they definitely have a taste for protein. If it tastes proteiny, they're going to want it. They're going to eat it. That's why they'll eat you can feed them raw meat, cooked meat, weird, gross meat. They'll eat anything proteiny. That's one reason they love cat and dog food is all the protein in it. They taste that. That's why they love the bugs. And depending on if they free range, if they're eating a certain plant more, it probably has more protein in it. Um, but when it comes to them eating their eggs, like I have fed full eggs before, just smashing them on the ground outside. And to me, chickens, it doesn't kind of click with them that this thing that I'm throwing on the outside of the coop is the same thing that they're laying in the nests. Versus if they are in the nest, they break the egg, they eat the egg, they go, oh, I'm going to eat these eggs that are now in the nest. Because I've had a couple egg eaters through my time, but those egg eaters would never eat an egg that was outside on the ground. Like sometimes the chicken will just lay an egg somewhere random. Those egg eaters would never eat an egg outside the nest because in their minds, it's only the ones that are in the nest that are so delicious. And that's kind of what brings on the egg eating, especially when it's just in the nest. But just to kind of avoid, just in case, don't want to help them connect any dots, if I do feed them eggs, or mostly raw eggs, I do crush them up into the feed so they can't tell that it's an egg. Try not to correlate that taste of protein with like the shape of the egg, if that makes sense. Because I know many people who just throw eggs to their chickens all the time, they never have egg eaters. But people who've had broken eggs in the nest may have an egg eater because they found out that the eggs in the nest are the good protein wonder balls. Like they just find out that they're delicious and will continue to eat them. But otherwise, when it comes to feeding them eggs, as long as they can't tell it's an egg, I think it's always in the clear. You don't have to worry about them translating taste to egg unless they've eaten straight from an egg, and then they'll know. All right, so this one might be a little controversial, sort of. So a lot of people get oyster shell and grit for their birds. And oyster shell is usually for a vitamin and mineral supplement. And while it kind of is a supplement, when it comes to chickens and their gut systems, for example, if I were to feed a purple cabbage to my chickens, it would just be a couple hours later that I'd start seeing purple poo because it dyes their poo purple or kind of like a weird green color. But I know that sounds odd, but it shows that food does not last very long in their system, and that does include their grit. And their grit is a little bit of like rocks and pebbles that they eat. It sits in their gizzard and it helps crush up the food. But every time that food passes out the gizzard, some of that grit goes with it. And oyster shell is essentially like a hard grit. So when it goes into their gizzard and gets crushed, parts of it are broken down and they can absorb some of those vitamins and minerals. So it can be an okay supplement, but I have found that it's not quite enough. They need more calcium than just oyster can provide, especially if you're dealing with like soft shelled problems in your chickens. They need more calcium, magnesium, just more vitamins in general. Oyster shell doesn't quite encompass what they need, and that's why I'm always feeding back their eggshells. Like not a lot, and I have a stash for when I'm having soft shelled issues. You feed them back their eggshells for a couple of weeks and everything kind of rebalances in their system and you get better shells. But I also kind of just feed them back their shells all the time, and I just sprinkle it on the ground so they can decide if they need it or not, because they kind of know that, oh, I'm low on calcium, oh, I'm low on this, so I'm going to eat more of this. And I just like giving them the option to eat the eggshell because if you mix it with their food, they're forced to eat it, and that's where you can have too much calcium and calcium buildup on their shells, which isn't exactly a bad thing. They can get rid of calcium, like extra calcium, kind of easy, but you still want to avoid it because it can cause really rough shells. And think of a chicken laying a very rough shell. It can't be super nice and can cause tearing and like abrasions, and we just want to avoid that. But honestly, I feed them their eggshells pretty regularly, and it works really nice for the calcium and minerals. You know, they're building eggs. You give them back what, at least half of what they built in their bodies. It's easy for their bodies to absorb that material and utilize it. So if they're having issues with soft eggshells, usually the turnaround for feeding back their eggshells is a lot better than the turnaround if you're trying to just supplement their calcium with grit or with oyster shell. Oyster shell is great, but I think it's kind of a way to make money off of people who like chickens. Just another, I mean, it's great. It's a great way to reuse oyster shell, and not that it's bad, like it's good as a grit, as a little bit of supplementation, but it shouldn't be like a staple thing that they need all the time, because if they have access to rocks, pebbles, sandy ground, that's their grit. And that same pebbles, rocks, and stuff that they're eating also have all the vitamins and many minerals that they need. So they might actually be getting a lot of those vitamins and minerals from the ground anyway, that the oyster would provide. If that makes sense, instead of buying oyster shell, they just have access to dirt and sand and that kind of stuff, and little bit and like little rocks and little pebbles. And that is essentially almost as good as oyster shell. Of course, you can supplement it, but I think that if you're looking for calcium and that kind of supplementation, their eggshells, feed them back to them, as well as just like buying a bottle of some sort of nutrient, vitamin, mix it in their water kind of stuff. There's Rooster Booster, there's Nutridrench, and oh, there's another one, and I can't remember it. But there's certain little like just vitamin drink that you can make for them. And I think that's more effective and efficient than oyster shell, especially when you're already dealing with the low calcium issue. So in a general sense, oyster shell is not exactly needed. Buying them grit is not exactly needed unless they don't have access to the ground that has like rocks and sands and pebbles. Yeah. um, and so I did kind of already talk about using like herbs and spices as treatments for a chicken's illness. Use them more as a preventative. I feel when it comes to the natural way of keeping healthy with like anti-pharmaceutical kind of aspect, um, that's like a daily, weekly kind of regimen that prevents versus treats. So like my chickens get oregano and thyme and chili flakes and all garlic and a little bit of onion all the time. Oh, my dog back there, he scared me. um, but you feed them those all the time, and it just helps prevent anything, as well as just keeps their bodies and systems healthy. So it helps prevent, doesn't treat. It can treat, but not as well as you'd really want it to. It takes a lot of time and effort and consistency for natural healing methods to really take hold and be able to help fix the problem. Mm. All right, well, that was kind of a long, rambly first live, and I didn't get any questions or anything, which that's okay. It was good practice. It's definitely a lot different than trying to make like a sort of prepared video. I'm not always super good off the cuff, but talked about kind of tips and tricks that you kind of read about and learn about when it comes to raising chickens, and some of them just aren't quite right. Like they are, but they're not. Some can be helpful, but some, like the apple cider vinegar, can actually be damaging in the long run. It's definitely some you want to do sometimes, some you can do more regularly. And these are things that I've tried and tested with my own birds over, oh, how many years has it been? Almost 10 years now of raising my own birds, as well as growing up with other animals and helping with those as well. But I'm sure there's more tips and tricks and kind of myths that I've missed, but those are kind of the ones that I kind of had written down and were thinking of. And I guess if there's other tips or tricks that you've heard of that you wonder how truthful they are, you could throw those in the comments, and maybe I'll do like little shorts or something talking about those, or maybe it'll be for a different live. But someone had requested a live to be about dogs and kind of dealing with dogs and chickens, I do believe. I think that's a really good topic because I could talk a lot about that. So I think for the next live, that's what we'll talk about. We'll talk about dogs on the homestead, but also dogs with chickens, because I've had a journey. I've had a journey, and at some point, hopefully, it's been a journey, and I'll definitely talk about it. But we'll say that's the end of this live because I don't know what my puppy is doing back there, but I'll have to go find out. But we'll see you in the next live, and hopefully it'll be a lot better than this one. Happy chicken tendering. Peace.